Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. The ocean of illusion has a shore, and it is our objective to reach that shore. In other words, go beyond illusion and reach reality. The mind, on the other hand, doesn't have borders. It doesn't have a shore. It just keeps going. And it can go in any and every direction. And as it wanders aimlessly in various directions, it takes you with it, if you are subject to the mind. Now, one of the things that we have to work on, that we have to understand, is that if we are looking to find reality, if we are looking to find truth, we must find it beyond the mind, beyond where the mind goes. We have to be able to go to places where the mind doesn't go. And to do this, we have to lose our attachment to the mind. And we have to lose our attachment to the things that the mind creates. The hallucinations that the mind creates. And the mind creates the outpourings of what comes from the lower self. Anger, selfishness, bigotry, lust, all come from the lower self. And then the mind grabs onto these things and gives them a veneer of reality, so that instead of anger being something to overcome, anger is shown as something that is real by the mind. Bigotry is shown as something real by the mind. Lust is shown as something real by the mind and as something that the mind tells you you should endeavor to get, to somehow accumulate. To begin to understand where the mind goes and what the mind does, we have to slow down. We have to become peaceful for a little while and just watch how the mind runs in all different directions. In order to bypass the mind, we have to institute our wisdom, so that when the mind takes us to places that are inappropriate, we detach ourselves from it and realize that that isn't who we are, that isn't what we need, and that isn't what we should be doing or going to. However, if we have let the mind control us, and we have somehow entered into the belief system that we are our mind, then things begin to happen that are out of control, just as the mind is out of control. Riots, begin to happen. Murders begin to happen. We lose our sense of morality and our sense of appropriate behavior when the mind is let loose. And when we accept what the mind tells us, or we accept what the minds of other people tell us. Fanaticism is a state of mind. Fanaticism is not reality. Fanaticism comes from the mind, and it comes from ignorance. It comes from giving credence to things that don't deserve credence. It comes from devotion to things that don't deserve devotion. It comes from an inappropriate application of whatever we hold dear, and to somehow help the situation in a way that the mind thinks is appropriate. Recently, we've had situations around the world where there has been reactions to various acts by some people that other people consider inflammatory and or disrespectful of their religion. However, the reaction to those acts has been inflammatory and disrespectful to their religion. When you see people running in the streets, shouting and screaming at the top of their lungs and claiming that this is done in the name of prophets and in the name of God, it should be self-evident that what we're witnessing are things that are out of control as opposed to a devotional exercise. And it shouldn't be hard for us to understand the difference. A stranger was coming into a new town, and at the gate, he met an old man who looked like he was wise, and he said to him, "I am coming from a town that was a terrible place. The people there were horrible. There was nowhere to find peace in this town. There was nowhere that anyone could make a home. There was nothing good about the people who lived there. Could you tell me, what's it like in this town? Would this be an appropriate place to settle and to make a home?" And the old man said to him, "Whatever town you came from, this town is worse. This is certainly not a place to settle. The people are at least as bad as from the town you came from, and probably worse. I would advise that you move on." And he left. Another man, a few hours later, came by. He was riding on a donkey, and he said, "I come from such and such a village. The people in this village are wonderful people. They're as kind as they can be. It was a wonderful place to live. But unfortunately, the skill that I have wasn't necessary there, and I couldn't make a living. So I need to find a place where I can use the skill that I have to make a living. But I want to find a place where the people are as kind and as loving and as genteel as the place where I come from." And the old man says to him, "Well, this town is like that. The people here are wonderful and kind and gentle, and it would be a wonderful place for you to settle." So the man went through the gates and went into the town. There was another man who was outside of the gates who heard both of these transactions. And he asked the old man, he said, "Why did you tell the first one that this was a terrible place? And why did you tell the second one this was a good place?" And the old man said, "Things are the way you are. And whatever you bring is what you get." The first man was full of hatred and animosity, and so everything around him was hatred and animosity. The second man was full of love and kindness, so all that he saw was love and kindness. So for the first man, this would have been a hateful place. For the second man, this would have been a loving place. And that's why I told him what I told him. And it's like that for us. We have to understand that we are a big part of creating what goes on around us and the situations that we have around us. If we are kind and loving and gentle and easygoing, then the reactions that will come to us will be kind, gentle, loving, and easygoing. But if we create situations that are difficult, we will always be in difficult situations. So we have to learn how to not have too many rules in our being. We'll have to learn how not to have too many expectations of others in our being. We have to learn not to judge the actions of others. It's very clear that judgment has been left to Allah. It's also very clear that man is not able to withhold judgment, and man is constantly judging other men, and they believe that this act of judgment is somehow helping Allah, is somehow protecting Allah. Rioting through the streets, jumping up and down to show their fervor is somehow creating a closer connection between themselves and God. None of this is true. God doesn't need you to riot. God doesn't need you to kill on his behalf. God doesn't need you to be severe. God needs you to enter into a space of kindness, of love, of serenity, and of humility. God needs you to become small, not to be large and overwhelming. Now, this is difficult to do when you're in a fanatical society. This is easier to do when you are amongst people who are kind and gentle and small. So each of us should try and find situations where we can be small and not get involved in situations where everyone is angry and everyone is looking for reasons to become angry. There was a donkey who had spent many, many years carrying loads and working out of the king's stable. When the donkey got older, they decided, for all of his years of service, to put him with the stallions. And he was brought to where the stallions were kept. And he looked around him and he saw these gorgeous animals. And he was wondering, what is it that I have done that God punished me to be a donkey? What is it that I have done that I had to bear burdens all my life, and these animals, these horses, run around free, are fed the best of foods, and nothing's expected of them. Well, after he was there for about a half a year thinking this way, a war broke out in the kingdom, and the soldiers came and took the horses and left to go to war. When the war was over, half of the horses that had been taken were killed. The other half had suffered wounds and saw terrible things and were incredibly distressed. And the donkey began to think, how fortunate I was that I was this humble donkey that didn't have to get involved in all of the suffering that these horses had to go through because they had to go to war. How lucky I was to be able to live this humble and quiet life. We need to be content with our circumstances. We need to learn to be satisfied with our portion. It is this anxiety of not having what we think we should, this jealousy of thinking others are getting more than we get, and because of it, we are somehow being deprived, that causes all the problems in existence. We have to become content somehow. We have to learn how to be content somehow. And the way to do this is to stop the rambling of the mind. The mind is always going to take you to places that somehow try to make the egocentric self bigger, more important, more dominant, more powerful, wealthy, and other inclinations like that. To do that will bring us distress. To stop that will bring us peacefulness. And the only way to stop it is through wisdom. Wisdom somehow has to enter into our being. We have to allow it to enter into our being. It's already there. We have to allow it to come out from us and be able to be strong enough to overcome the mind and all of the inclinations of the mind so that we can become peaceful. We have to have a belief system that our inner wisdom, our inner inclination towards truth, our inner inclination towards God is stronger than our mind's inclination towards the growth of the self. And we have to understand that that is the conflict within our being. What is it that we are after? The growth of the self, or making the self smaller and allowing the truth to grow within us. The wise will tell you that our purpose is to become small. Our purpose is to become believers. Our purpose is to create within ourself the acknowledgement that reality exists within ourselves and also exists within others, but not everyone is capable of turning inwardly towards that place inside of themselves where Allah resides, where the Ketubs reside, where the prophets reside, where the sanctuary for all believers resides, but instead they turn outside. to make a show of their beliefs, to make an announcement of their beliefs, to pronounce their beliefs in the way that the mind sees the truth, in the way that the mind sees religion. And the way that the mind sees things is to make whatever you're involved in bigger and more important than everything else. When in truth, the only thing that is important is Allah, and Allah exists within you. But the mind creates duality. Allah is something you talk about, it's something you scream about, it's something you rave about. It isn't a turning inwardly where peace and mercy and compassion and love and kindness exist. Religion takes on many forms. Religion takes on many identities. And some of these identities are beyond what Allah has created man to be involved in. Religion creates wars. Man was not created by God to be involved in wars. Man was created by God in order to love, be kind, and be peaceful. And until we understand that and can tell the difference, we will be in conflict. So we need to understand that we have a portion of us that needs to control that portion of us that has no control. And what is that portion of us that has no control? It's the mind. The mind has to be reined in. If we can't rein in the mind will run free. A horse is very useful when you ride it, as long as you control it. But if you lose the reins to the horse and the horse runs free, you're in danger of falling off the horse, cracking your head or cracking your legs or breaking something. We can't ride our mind unless we control it. And when we control it, it becomes very useful. But if we don't control it, it takes us to places that will cause us extreme danger. It takes us to places beyond morality, saying that for the sake of this situation, we are permitted to go beyond morality. The mind can rationalize anything. The mind can create a position that is totally out of the bounds of Allah's instructions and say that it is the penultimate of service to Allah. And that's why we need guidance from true sheikhs. The problem is that there are many teachers in this world who are not true teachers. It is said that Satan can recite the Quran. It is said that Satan can teach the Quran, however, his interpretation is other than truthful. Satan hides himself in very open ways. He can hide himself as an imam. He can hide himself as a religious teacher in order to somehow trick man into losing his way and following Satan's way. We need to be very cognizant of God's qualities. And in understanding God's qualities, we have to become cognizant that people who go outside of the realm of God's qualities, claiming that they are protecting God's qualities, are committing actions that are vile, and they're trying to take us with them. We somehow have to know the difference between right and wrong. And the difference between right and wrong is the first lesson we have to learn in becoming a true man. If we don't know the difference between right and wrong, and if we can't make the differentiation of what we can do and what we can't do, we have lost our way. We will continue to lose our way, and there is no way to redirect us because we've lost the basic understanding of what's permissible and what's not permissible. Being out of control is not permissible. Being angry is not permissible. Being bigoted is not permissible. Being selfish is not permissible. Being full of lust is not permissible. Being jealous is not permissible. We have to find our way back to what is permissible. What happens is if we spend too much time doing what's not permissible, we become addicted to what's not permissible, and we rationalize that those things are permissible. Once, when I first met my teacher, he indicated to us that we should watch what we eat and that pork was not permissible. And I was with my wife and a couple of other people, and we were talking about eating. And one of them said to me, you know, Bawa said that we couldn't eat pork, but I've been eating bacon all my life, so I'm sure he wasn't talking to me. He meant that for other people. And I've heard that so many times that when laws or direction was set down, people would say, well, he wasn't talking to me. He meant that just to the person he was talking to. And it's like that. I've even heard the opposite. I've heard, well, he was saying it to me, but he was using me as an example for other people. He really didn't mean that for me. He meant that for other people. The ability to rationalize, to go back to the point of what you want to do, is one of the great tools that the mind has, and one of the ways that Satan uses the mind to get you to do things that you shouldn't do. People would come to the teacher with questions, and the teacher would give an answer. And of course, the teacher didn't speak English. So the first reaction often from the people who asked the question was, the translator missed the translation of the question. Could we say it again? And he would repeat his question. The translator would repeat what he had said, and the answer would come back exactly the same way. And the person would say again, somehow the translation wasn't right. And then it would be, the process would repeat itself, and the answer would come back the same way. And once again, the questioner would say, the translation was incorrect. Let's try this again. And then this time, usually by the third time, Bawa would say to them, well, do what you want. And they thought, they interpreted this statement of do what you want as it's okay to do whatever you like, when in truth, it meant, I'm done, I've tried, now you're going to do what you want anyway, so go ahead and do what you want. This path is subtle, and it takes a subtleness from ourselves to move on this path appropriately. And we have to understand some basic points in order to be able to move forward. As I said, first is to know the difference between right and wrong. Then we have to begin to understand Allah's qualities, and we have to begin to incorporate them into ourselves. And we have to learn and understand that if someone is trying to take us outside of the realm of Allah's qualities to do things that are outside of Allah's morality and Allah's shariat, Allah's rules of conduct, we shouldn't do them. It's not more complicated than that, but it becomes more complicated than that through confusion. Satan has ways to confuse the mind so that that which is simple and straightforward becomes complex. Reality is not complex. The mind is complex because the mind doesn't understand things. You know, if you're talking to someone who doesn't know what they're talking about and who tries to give you advice, the advice is going to be incredibly complicated. However, if you're talking to someone who knows what they're talking about, the advice is usually very, very simple and very easy to understand. A doctor who doesn't know what the cure for whatever you have is will try hundreds of medications because he doesn't know what you need. A lawyer who doesn't know the answer to your situation will give you these complex scenarios because he doesn't understand how the law works. It's very important that when you look for advice, you find someone who is straightforward and who has a certain amount of wisdom. And in looking for a teacher, you have to find someone who is straightforward and who is wise. And you have to watch their qualities. If their qualities are outside of the realm of what is permissible, then how can they possibly guide you? There's a story of a scholar who was giving lectures on adultery and having mistresses or more than one man. And he would frighten his audience against this by telling him that there was a special place in hell where there was a pole that was hotter than the rest of hell. And the ones who committed adultery were made to hold on to this pole. And the fire that they suffered was greater than the fire anyone else suffered. Now, it just so happened that this man, this scholar who was giving this lecture, had a mistress. And she was at the lecture and she heard this talk. And after the talk, she went back to her place, and then the scholar came back to her house and wanted to do what they usually do. And she said, I can't, we have to stop this. I heard your lecture tonight and I can't be involved in this anymore. And he said, oh, that, well, you should know that the pole that was so hot once is not hot anymore because of all the people who've been attached to it already, that all the heat has taken away. And secondly, because of the comfort that you give me, you won't be punished, because comforting me elevates you to another level. Well, there we go. Rationalization, making what's inappropriate appropriate, allowing things to happen that shouldn't happen because of reasoning that is outside of the realm of what's permitted. We need to understand that our mind is constantly rationalizing and trying to make excuses for us to allow us to do what we shouldn't be doing. The truth will always rise to the surface, and our deeds are all recorded by the angels on our shoulders. And at the time of judgment, we bring our own witness to the forefront through our own deeds, which are played back for us. It is not dependent on how we were born, into what family we were born, into what our status is within the community. It is dependent on our deeds. The prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said to his daughter on the day of judgment, it is not going to matter that you are the prophet's daughter. It is going to matter what your deeds were. And this is what we have to understand, that everything is dependent on our actions, on our deeds, on who we've become, on how we do things, on our intention when we do things, and our ability to stay away from that which is wrong and do that which is right. And we are constantly put in situations where we have to make these decisions. And we should constantly make the kind decision. We should constantly make the loving decision. We should constantly make the decision that is integrated with Allah's qualities. If we can't do that, and if we permit ourselves to go outside of Allah's qualities, that means that we have permitted ourselves to be aligned and allied with Satan and the satanic qualities. It's very important for us to know the difference. And it's also very important for us to understand that the mind has an inclination to do whatever the mind thinks is best to make you bigger. And this is the opposite of becoming small. This is the opposite of becoming humble. This is the opposite of becoming integrated with the qualities that are the qualities that will take us to an eternal life after this body is gone. The mind doesn't consider that. The mind is wrapped up in this body as if this body was eternal and as if this body meant something and should somehow control things. Well, it isn't so. The only control is through our Lord. The only control is from God. Everything comes from him. Everything is from him. And he alone exists. And if we think that we can exist outside of that realm, we are mistaken. And we are mistaken in a way that has an effect on our eternal life. So we have to become very careful. We have to become cognizant of the fact that within us, we have an enemy who is trying to get us to do that which we shouldn't be doing. So in the same way that within our heart, we have Allah, the Ketubs, and all the prophets, we also have Satan whispering in our ear to our mind to contradict that which is going on in our heart. We have to make the intention that we are men of heart, not of mind. And we have to grow the heart, not grow the mind. We have to grow in supplication to the heart, not in submission to the mind. We have to submit to truth, not to becoming bigger. We have to submit to humility, not to power. And if we can do this, then we can become true man. But otherwise, we're going to be constantly in a state of flux, in a state of war between ourselves and the truth, between the importance of ourselves and our ideas and the truth. In essence, we know very little. We think we know a lot, but we know very little. Mullah Nasruddin was considered a very wise man. And so a man came into town and said, I've come to debate you. And I'm ready to take on the acknowledgement of this community that I am wiser than you are. And then Mullah said to him, well, tell you what we'll do. You ask me 40 questions, and I will give you one answer to all of them. And if I can do that, you will leave this town and never come back again. And if I can't do that, we'll acknowledge that you are the greater of us two. So the wise man asked a question, then another, and then another. Finally, he asked all 40 questions. And he said, Mullah, do you have an answer? And he said, yes, I have one answer to all of your questions. I know nothing. And the town groaned, but acknowledged that the mullah said what he was going to do, and he did it. And the other man left town. In truth, we know very little. If we want to stay safe, stay in a place of love. If we want to stay safe, stay in a place of kindness. Stay in a place of humility. Stay in a place where you are small, and Allah will raise us up. Allah will bring us close to Him. And the treasure of being brought close to Him is greater than anything that we can be given in this illusory world. May that be the path that we all go on. Ameen, Ameen, Ya Rabbil Alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.